Marcus Ellison was not born into wealth, but he was born with a mind that refused to accept limits. From a young age, he dreamed bigger than the world around him. Growing up in a small neighborhood where opportunities were few, Marcus often spent his evenings reading old business magazines he found in the local library. While other kids were outside playing basketball, he was sketching ideas for companies in his notebook, imagining himself leading something great one day. His mother, a hard-working nurse, used to tell him, "Son, success isn't about where you start, it's about where you aim." Those words stayed with him forever. As a young man, Marcus worked part-time jobs to support his education. He washed cars, delivered newspapers, and even did night shifts at a small diner just to afford college tuition. Every paycheck reminded him of his goal, to create something that would not just make money but also make a difference. When he got into a top business school, he knew this was his chance to prove himself. But being one of the few black students in the program wasn't easy. Some professors underestimated him and some classmates ignored his ideas. Yet Marcus never complained. He let his work speak for him. In his final year, he developed a small tech project, a software that helped local businesses track sales more efficiently. It was simple but smart, and it caught the attention of a few investors. After graduation, Marcus decided to take a risk. Instead of joining a big corporation like everyone else, he used his savings and borrowed money from friends to start his own company. People called him crazy for leaving a stable future behind, but he believed in his vision more than anyone else. The early days of his startup were tough. Marcus and his small team worked out of a cramped apartment. They couldn't afford fancy offices or big marketing campaigns. They coded all night, lived on takeout food, and sometimes slept under their desks. There were moments when Marcus thought about giving up, especially when clients canceled contracts or when the internet bill couldn't be paid. But every failure only made him stronger. He had seen worse in life, and he refused to quit now that he was so close to something great. After months of sleepless nights and endless challenges, the company finally got its first big client. That deal changed everything. Suddenly, investors started calling, and Marcus's company began to grow faster than anyone expected. Within 5 years, it became one of the most promising tech firms in the country. His innovation, leadership, and charisma turned him into a respected figure in the business world. People admired how he treated his employees like family. He believed that success wasn't about being the smartest person in the room, but about building a team that trusted one another. Marcus often said, "A company isn't just made of ideas, it's made of people who believe in those ideas." Under his leadership, the company's culture became something rare, a place where creativity and fairness actually mattered. The media loved him. Magazine covers called him the next big thing in tech. News anchors described him as a symbol of progress, a young black CEO who had broken barriers in a world where very few looked like him at the top. His story inspired millions who dreamed of success despite the odds. Marcus became a role model, invited to conferences and universities to speak about leadership, diversity, and innovation. But while the public saw his success, few knew the struggles behind it. He worked tirelessly, missing family events and holidays, always chasing perfection. He wanted to make his company not just successful but untouchable, something that would survive long after him. But as the company expanded, so did the pressure. Investors demanded faster growth and the board wanted higher profits. Some of them didn't understand his long-term vision and only cared about short-term gains. Still, Marcus remained calm. He believed that real success takes time. He often told his board, "You can't build something lasting by chasing shortcuts." But not everyone agreed with him. Some of the older board members saw him as too bold, too independent, and sometimes too young to be making such big calls. They respected his intelligence but quietly doubted his decisions. Even with those silent tensions growing behind closed doors, Marcus continued to push the company forward. He entered new markets, expanded operations globally, and built partnerships that made headlines. Every step he took seemed like a victory, but with every success, he made new enemies, people who didn't like seeing someone like him holding so much power and influence. Despite all this, Marcus stayed focused on his dream. He wasn't in it for fame or money. He wanted to prove that someone from a humble background could stand at the top of the business world through hard work, intelligence, and integrity. He wanted to open doors for others who looked like him, to show them that they too could rise, no matter the barriers. By the time he turned 40, Marcus Ellison had everything most people only dream of: success, recognition, and respect. But deep inside, he still carried the same fire he had as a kid, with a notebook full of ideas. What he didn't know, though, was that the very empire he had built with such dedication was already surrounded by silent forces waiting to take it away. And as the world celebrated his achievements, somewhere in the boardroom a quiet resentment was growing, a storm waiting to strike. Marcus's journey to the top was nothing short of extraordinary, but the higher he climbed, the more dangerous the air became. What began as a dream was about to turn into a battle for survival, one that would test not just his leadership, but his faith, his character, and everything he had built from nothing. Success had made Marcus Ellison a public hero, but inside the tall glass walls of the company's headquarters, not everyone was cheering for him. As the company's name grew across headlines and stock prices soared, quiet resentment began to form behind the smiles and polite handshakes. The same board members who once praised his vision now whispered doubts in private meetings. At first it was subtle, a few raised eyebrows in discussions, a few side comments after meetings. Some of the older members of the board, veterans of the corporate world, felt uneasy watching a young black CEO take bold steps that defied their conservative ways. They believed Marcus was moving too fast, expanding too widely, and taking too many risks. But deep down, it wasn't just about business. It was about control. They had created this company long before Marcus joined, and they didn't like feeling as though he was the one calling all the shots now. Marcus noticed the shift. Meetings that once felt supportive now carried an undercurrent of tension. When he presented new ideas, like investing in renewable technology or developing products for international markets, he was met with silence, not applause. "We should be careful," one board member would say. "Maybe slow down," another would suggest. But Marcus believed that hesitation was the enemy of innovation. He tried to reassure them that growth required courage, not fear. Yet his confidence was slowly being twisted into arrogance in their eyes. The board began holding private discussions without Marcus. They started talking about his leadership style, his aggressive decisions, and his emotional approach to management. Words like reckless, ambitious, and unpredictable floated around the room. One board member even said he's too young to understand how fragile these markets really are. Another replied, "He's trying to be a visionary, but he's gambling with our legacy." What none of them admitted aloud was that Marcus's success made them feel powerless, and that fear was growing. Marcus was aware of the politics, but he refused to be dragged into the game. He stayed focused on his mission, convincing himself that results would silence his critics. "If the numbers are strong, they'll have no reason to doubt me," he told his assistant one late night. And the numbers were strong. Profits were up, client satisfaction was high, and the brand was globally respected. But the board didn't see a success story anymore. They saw a man who didn't need their approval. Things took a sharper turn when Marcus announced his next big plan, a major partnership that could expand their reach into untapped international markets. It was risky, yes, but potentially groundbreaking. He believed it could secure the company's future for decades. The board, however, saw it as a step too far. They demanded more details, more control, and more say in his decisions. Marcus, feeling cornered, decided to keep certain aspects of the deal confidential until it was finalized. He didn't want interference to ruin negotiations. That choice, though strategic, became the seed of mistrust. Behind closed doors, board members began to question whether Marcus was hiding something. "Why won't he show us the full contract?" one asked. "Maybe he's making deals for himself," another suggested. Rumors spread like wildfire, and within weeks doubt replaced trust. A few members even started contacting journalists off the record, feeding small hints that the CEO may be acting independently of the board. It was a dangerous game, one that Marcus didn't even know was being played against him. Despite the growing hostility, Marcus remained calm in public. He continued to speak confidently at investor meetings and media events, painting a bright picture of the company's future. But inside he could feel the pressure tightening like a noose. Every presentation felt like walking into a room full of smiling enemies. He could see it in their eyes. They were waiting for him to fail. One evening after a particularly tense meeting, Marcus sat alone in his office, the city lights reflecting off the window. He replayed the conversation in his head, the skeptical tone, the sarcastic smiles, the subtle jabs. "They don't trust me anymore," he whispered to himself. For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar: isolation. The very people who were supposed to guide and support him now seemed to be plotting against him. In the following months, the divide between Marcus and the board deepened. They questioned his every move, demanded weekly reports, and started involving themselves in day-to-day decisions. It was as if they wanted to remind him who truly held the power. Marcus fought back with professionalism, keeping his composure even when they provoked him. But deep inside he knew this wasn't just a disagreement. It was the beginning of a silent war, and yet Marcus refused to let resentment stop him. He believed in the company and its people and in his vision. He told himself that once the new deal succeeded, everyone would see that he was right all along. He thought results would heal the rift, but he underestimated how deeply pride and prejudice can twist the truth. What Marcus didn't realize was that the board was already moving behind his back. Private phone calls, secret meetings, and unsigned letters of agreement began circulating quietly. While he was planning the company's next breakthrough, they were planning his downfall. The stage was set, a silent conflict between innovation and control, between vision and fear. And though Marcus didn't know it yet, this hidden tension would soon explode into the decision that would change everything. A decision made without his knowledge, without fairness, and without a single vote. The whispers had grown louder, but Marcus Ellison kept his focus on what mattered most: saving his company's future. The tension with the board didn't stop him from dreaming big. He had built the company from nothing, and he wasn't about to let it crumble because a few people couldn't see beyond their fear. The company needed fresh investment to survive the next stage of global expansion, and Marcus knew the traditional board members would never approve his bold ideas. So he made a choice, one that would change everything. It started quietly. During a business conference in Singapore, Marcus met with representatives from an international investment firm called Ardent Global Partners. They were powerful, wealthy, and most importantly interested in the kind of innovation Marcus was leading. They offered what no one else dared: billions in funding, full creative freedom, and the promise of rapid global expansion. To Marcus, it sounded like the miracle the company needed. But miracles, as he was about to learn, often come with hidden prices. He began secret negotiations with Ardent Global. Only a few trusted executives knew about it: his legal advisor, his financial director, and his longtime assistant. Marcus told them, "We'll finalize this deal first, then present it to the board once it's ready. If they see the numbers, they'll have to support it." It seemed logical at the time. He wanted results, not arguments. But by keeping it quiet, he unknowingly gave his enemies the weapon they'd later use against him. The deal looked perfect on paper. Ardent Global promised a massive cash infusion in exchange for a minority stake. But buried deep in the legal text was a clause, one that granted Ardent temporary controlling rights if executive leadership were to change suddenly. Marcus barely noticed it. He trusted his lawyers and assumed it was standard corporate protection. He was wrong. That clause would become the trigger for one of the fastest corporate collapses in modern history. Marcus worked tirelessly to make the deal a reality. He spent nights reading contracts, attending calls across time zones, and fine-tuning every detail. He saw this as his chance to secure the company's independence forever. If he could finalize it, the firm would no longer rely on the board's old-fashioned decisions or conservative investors. He wanted freedom. Freedom to innovate, to grow, to lead without being chained by politics. But back home, the board was growing suspicious. They noticed financial movements that didn't match their reports. A few overseas trips Marcus took weren't listed in official schedules. When one of the junior analysts mentioned a foreign investment discussion, alarm bells went off. The board's chairman, Richard Hale, began quietly digging. He ordered internal audits and started questioning Marcus's closest team members. Within weeks, they uncovered fragments of the truth: a mysterious deal, a private negotiation, and large undisclosed meetings with investors abroad. When Hale confronted Marcus in a board meeting, the room went silent. "Marcus," he said coldly, "are you making financial arrangements without the board's authorization?" The air grew heavy. Marcus looked him straight in the eye. "I'm doing what's necessary to protect this company," he replied. "You're protecting yourself," Hale shot back. The argument turned tense, voices rising, tempers flaring. Some board members sided with Hale. Others stayed quiet, too afraid to choose a side. Marcus left that meeting knowing he had crossed an invisible line. Still, he didn't back down. "They'll thank me when they see the results," he told his assistant that night. He believed that success would silence every doubt. In his heart, Marcus wasn't trying to betray anyone. He was trying to build something lasting. But in a world of power, good intentions don't always matter. Perception is everything, and to the board, secrecy meant danger. A few weeks later, the deal was finalized. Marcus signed the agreement with Ardent Global in a private office in New York. He shook hands with their representatives, feeling a mix of pride and relief. "We did it," he said softly. "This will secure our future." He didn't realize that in that same moment his company's future had already begun to crumble. Word of the secret deal leaked faster than Marcus expected. Within days, board members received confidential copies of the agreement. They were furious. To them, Marcus had crossed the line between leadership and deception. They saw the foreign clause as a threat, a ticking bomb that could hand control of the company to outsiders. They didn't see his vision. They only saw betrayal. Late one evening, Marcus received an email from the board secretary. Emergency meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning. He knew what it meant. He stayed in his office long after everyone had left, staring at the city skyline. The reflection of lights on the glass felt distant, like a world slipping out of his hands. He thought about the years he had sacrificed, the nights without sleep, the faith he had built into every brick of his company. He told himself, they won't do this. They can't, but he underestimated them. The next morning, the board gathered without him. No invitations, no agenda, no vote, just a decision. They decided to remove Marcus Ellison as CEO, effective immediately. The announcement was cold and short, just 3 lines emailed to the entire company. His name was erased from the leadership page within hours. Marcus found out like everyone else and from his phone. His face went pale as he read the message. After everything he had built, it was over in seconds. He had no chance to defend himself, no vote, no warning. The board called it a necessary step for corporate stability. But Marcus knew the truth. This wasn't stability. It was revenge. He sat in silence as the realization hit him. The hidden deal that was meant to save his company would soon destroy it. And the very people he had trusted to protect the company had just unleashed the storm that would bury it forever. Marcus Ellison sat in his car outside the company headquarters, gripping his phone, rereading the email over and over. His name, gone. His title, gone. His dream, stolen. The words blurred in his eyes as disbelief turned into cold silence. The board had done the unthinkable. They had dismissed him without a single vote, without even giving him a chance to speak. Inside the glass tower he once ruled, chaos was already spreading. Employees were whispering in hallways. Messages flew across chat rooms and confusion clouded every floor. "Did you hear? Marcus is out. Wait without a vote? That can't be legal." But the board's message was clear and they were in control now. A statement was released to the media within hours, calling it a leadership restructuring for the stability of the company. The truth was buried under polished words. Marcus watched the building from his car as people hurried in and out, carrying files, avoiding eye contact. He wanted to storm in to demand answers, but a part of him knew it was over. The board had locked him out not just metaphorically, but literally. His ID badge was deactivated, his office was sealed, and his calendar wiped. Just days earlier, he had been the face of innovation. Now he was treated like an intruder in his own empire. News broke online before sunset. CEO Marcus Ellison abruptly removed. Board takes over after internal conflict. Leadership crisis shakes tech giant. Every outlet had its version, most of them filled with speculation. Some reporters hinted at a secret deal gone wrong. Others painted Marcus as a reckless risk-taker who had gambled with the company's future. The man who was once celebrated as a symbol of progress was now being dragged through the mud. At home, Marcus sat in the dark, the city lights flickering through the window. His phone buzzed endlessly. Journalists, former employees, even friends who didn't know what to say. His assistant texted, They're saying you broke protocol. The board is blaming you for everything. Marcus stared at the screen, anger slowly building inside him. They used my own deal against me, he whispered. The same deal that was meant to save them. Meanwhile, inside the boardroom, celebration was quiet but visible. Richard Hale, the chairman, leaned back in his chair as he signed the final dismissal papers. It's done, he said calmly. Some members nodded, others avoided his gaze. A few looked uneasy, realizing they had crossed a moral line. But Hale was confident. We did what had to be done, he said. Now we can fix the mess he created. They didn't know that the fix would soon turn into a disaster. The next morning, the new interim CEO, a loyal ally of Hale, held a press conference. He promised transparency and renewed trust to investors. But within hours, Ardent Global Partners, the firm Marcus had secretly signed with, sent an urgent message. Their contract had a clause. If the CEO was removed or replaced, all financial support would be immediately withdrawn, and existing debts would become payable within 24 hours. The board didn't believe it at first. It's a bluff, one member said. But by noon, the reality hit. Ardent's lawyers froze all transactions, revoked guarantees, and demanded full repayment. Billions in unsecured loans that the company couldn't possibly cover. The same deal they had mocked as reckless was now their lifeline, and they had cut it off themselves. By evening, panic swept through the building. Investors began selling shares at record speed. The company's stock price plummeted. Suppliers demanded payments. Banks started calling in their loans. Emails flooded in from partners asking if the rumors were true. The empire Marcus had built was collapsing in real time, and the board had no plan to stop it. Marcus watched the chaos unfold from afar. Every news update was like a knife to the chest. The company files for emergency financial review. Investors lose confidence after leadership scandal. The same journalists who had once praised him were now circling like vultures. Yet beneath the pain there was a bitter sense of vindication. They thought I was the problem, he murmured. Now they'll see what happens without me. That night an emergency board meeting was held. For the first time the room wasn't filled with pride but fear. Hale slammed his hand on the table. How could we have missed this clause? The legal director stammered. We didn't have access to the full contract and Marcus handled it personally. Hale's face went pale. He realized the truth. The clause that destroyed them had been activated the moment they fired Marcus. By midnight, the company's financial department sent an internal memo. Immediate bankruptcy risk. All operations suspended until further notice. Employees were ordered to stop all spending, and offices began closing their doors. The media caught wind within hours. Cameras gathered outside headquarters. Reporters shouted questions. It was chaos. Public, humiliating, and irreversible. Marcus drove by the building one last time. Security guards stood at the entrance, blocking reporters, their faces tight with exhaustion. The company logo, once shining proudly, flickered weakly in the nightlight as if the building itself was losing life. He parked across the street, staring in silence. He had dreamed of leading this company into the future. Now it was sinking before his eyes. He didn't smile, didn't cry. He simply whispered, "It didn't have to end like this." He thought of the employees who believed in him, the families who depended on those jobs, and the years of effort now turning to dust. The world would remember this as a scandal. Few would remember the truth, that it wasn't greed or recklessness that destroyed the company but pride and betrayal. As dawn broke over the city, Marcus drove away, disappearing into the quiet streets. Behind him, the empire he built was burning, not from his mistake but from the board's arrogance. The breaking point had come and it had shattered everything. The morning after the collapse, the city woke up to a storm, not of rain, but of headlines. Every news channel, every website, every radio station was talking about one thing: the fall of the company that once symbolized innovation and progress. Screens flashed with breaking news banners. CEO Marcus Ellison fired without vote. Company faces sudden bankruptcy. Social media exploded with opinions, theories, and blame. Overnight, Marcus had gone from being a visionary leader to the face of one of the biggest corporate disasters in recent memory. Reporters surrounded his house, cameras waiting by his gate, hoping to catch a glimpse of the man at the center of the chaos. Former employees flooded online platforms with posts, some defending him, others angry and confused. "He was the best leader we ever had," one wrote. "He ruined everything," said another. It was a storm of voices, and none of them truly knew what had happened behind closed doors. Marcus stayed inside, curtains drawn, his phone buzzing nonstop. Every notification brought another wave of pain. Journalists demanding interviews, friends sending cautious messages, lawyers calling for statements. He didn't answer any of them. For the first time in his career, Marcus was speechless. How could he explain that the very deal meant to protect his company had been twisted into a weapon to destroy it? How could he convince the world that he had been betrayed by the people he trusted most? Across town, the board members were in full panic mode. The bankruptcy had hit faster and harder than anyone predicted. Investors were furious, the media was relentless, and regulators were already questioning their decisions. The board's chairman, Richard Hale, tried to control the narrative. He stood before reporters at a hastily arranged press conference and declared, this was the result of a mismanaged and unauthorized deal made by the former CEO. The board acted in the best interest of the company. It was a lie, a carefully crafted one, but it worked. For a while, the world believed it. Headlines began to shift blame squarely onto Marcus. Commentators called him reckless, secretive, and too ambitious for his own good. They painted a picture of a man who gambled with billions and lost. In living rooms and offices everywhere, people shook their heads at the story of the fallen genius. Marcus watched the conference live on TV. His jaw tightened with every word Hale spoke. Best interest of the company, he repeated bitterly. They destroyed the company to protect themselves. His assistant, who had stayed loyal even after his dismissal, urged him to speak out. You have to tell your side, she said. They're shaping the story and the world's believing them. But Marcus shook his head. Not yet, he said quietly. If I speak now, it'll sound like revenge. The truth needs to come out on its own. Days turned into weeks and the damage only grew. Thousands of employees lost their jobs. Offices shut down. Families who had built their lives around the company's success suddenly faced unemployment. News outlets began visiting neighborhoods where workers lived, interviewing people who were now struggling to pay bills. The collapse had rippled far beyond boardrooms. It had reached homes, schools, and communities. Public opinion slowly began to shift. People started asking harder questions. How could the board fire a CEO without a vote? Why wasn't there oversight? Who approved the dismissal? Investigative journalists began digging deeper, uncovering inconsistencies in the board's story. Financial analysts noticed that the bankruptcy wasn't caused by mismanagement, but by the sudden withdrawal of Ardent Global's funding, triggered directly by Marcus's firing. The truth was beginning to surface, but it was buried under too many lies to shine clearly. One night, a popular talk show host aired a segment titled, The Silent CEO, What Really Happened to Marcus Ellison. The host replayed Hale's press conference side by side with leaked emails, showing that some board members had known about the Ardent Clause before firing Marcus. If these messages are real, the host said, then this wasn't an accident. This was a setup. The internet lit up. Hashtags began trending. Justice for Marcus, Cower the board knew, our corporate betrayal. Marcus watched the broadcast in silence. He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. The vindication felt hollow. The company was already gone, and the people who had once believed in him were scattered. He thought about calling a press conference, telling the whole truth, but something in him hesitated. They won't understand, he told his assistant. They'll hear my words and twist them like they always do. But as the days passed, the silence became unbearable. One afternoon, Marcus stood before the mirror, straightened his tie, and decided he would speak. Not to defend himself, but to tell the truth. He called a small independent journalist, someone who had covered his rise years ago, someone he could trust. Meet me tomorrow, he said. No cameras, no scripts, just truth. When the interview aired, it wasn't dramatic. Marcus spoke calmly, explaining every detail of the Ardent deal, how it was meant to save the company, how the board refused to listen, and how their secret decision had triggered the collapse. I didn't destroy the company, he said quietly. I tried to protect it, but you can't protect something from the people who want to control it more than they want to save it. The world finally started to listen. The story shifted again. from one of failure to one of betrayal. But by then, the damage was done. The company's assets had been sold, the employees had moved on, and the brand name that once meant innovation now symbolized tragedy. Marcus walked away from the spotlight after that interview. He didn't fight for money, didn't sue the board, didn't seek revenge. He simply disappeared, choosing peace over publicity. Yet his story lingered, a story of how ambition, pride, and power can destroy even the brightest vision. And somewhere in quiet corners of the internet and in whispered conversations in business schools, people still say his name, not as a warning, but as a lesson. Because Marcus Ellison didn't fall from grace. He was pushed. The truth was, finally out, but it came too late to save what had already fallen apart. The company Marcus Ellison had built with sleepless nights and endless hope was now nothing more than a name in bankruptcy filings. What had begun as a single act of betrayal had set off a chain reaction that no one could stop. It was like watching dominoes fall, one decision knocking down another, faster and faster until everything was gone. In the days after Marcus's removal, the company's internal systems went into chaos. Suppliers stopped shipments, partners froze contracts, and the financial department couldn't access half its accounts because Ardent Global had pulled its guarantees. Overnight, the firm's credit rating dropped from gold to garbage. The phones never stopped ringing. Creditors, investors, journalists, all demanding answers no one had. The board had thought firing Marcus would restore order. Instead, it unleashed disaster. Inside the once bustling headquarters, panic replaced purpose. Departments that used to hum with energy now echoed with silence. Employees whispered rumors in the elevators. Some believed the company would recover. Others packed their desks quietly, not waiting to be told to leave. People who had once proudly called the company their second home now avoided eye contact in the hallways. The family Marcus had built through trust and hard work was falling apart piece by piece. Meanwhile, Richard Hale and the board scrambled to fix the damage. They called emergency meetings, hired new consultants, and begged banks for extensions. But the numbers didn't lie. They were running out of money, fast. Every hour the company lost millions in market value. Their biggest investors withdrew, terrified of being dragged into the collapse. The press called it the fastest corporate meltdown of the decade. Hale blamed Marcus, saying his secret deal caused the chaos, but deep down, he knew the truth. It wasn't the deal that destroyed them. It was their decision to end it. Marcus, watching from afar, could only shake his head. They thought they could replace vision with control, he said to his assistant. But control without direction is just panic. He had warned them about depending on old strategies, about resisting change. But pride had deafened them. Now, they were drowning in the very storm they had created. As the crisis deepened, former employees began speaking out. They told stories of ignored warnings, mismanagement, and fear spreading through the company after Marcus's removal. Everything changed the moment he left, one manager said in an interview. It was like the heart stopped beating. Their testimonies added fuel to the fire, and soon, the company became the center of public outrage. Lawsuits started, piling up, from investors, suppliers, and even employees who claimed wrongful termination. Within 2 weeks, the stock value had crashed by 90%. What was once a multi-billion-dollar empire was now worth less than a small-town factory. The company's offices in London, Toronto, and Tokyo shut down. Projects that Marcus had personally started, green energy initiatives, scholarships, and community partnerships, were abruptly canceled. It was as if all the good he had built was being erased line by line. The board members began turning on each other. In closed-door meetings, accusations flew like bullets. You were the one who pushed for his removal. You said it was safe. You approved the decision. Voices echoed through the halls, breaking the cold corporate calm they had always maintained. Hale tried to hold his power, but cracks were showing. A few directors resigned, quietly disappearing before the lawsuits reached them. The empire they had tried to seize was collapsing under its own weight. Outside, protesters gathered in front of the headquarters, holding signs that read, justice for workers, and where's the truth? Former employees cried on live television, sharing stories of sudden layoffs and unpaid salaries. News stations aired images of families packing boxes from offices that had once been filled with hope. The company logo, once a symbol of innovation, now represented greed, pride, and failure. Marcus watched it all unfold in silence. He wasn't happy to see them fall. If anything, it broke him further. "I never wanted this," he said softly one night, standing by his window as rain traced down the glass. "I wanted to build something lasting." His assistant replied, "You did, Marcus. They destroyed it, not you." He nodded, but his eyes stayed fixed on the city skyline, glowing faintly under the storm clouds. "Maybe," he said, "but my name will forever be tied to their ruin." The real shock came when internal financial documents were leaked to the public. They revealed that the board had known about the ardent clause before firing Marcus, and ignored it. The documents showed that lawyers had even warned them about potential bankruptcy if they terminated the deal. When the truth hit the media, outrage turned into fury. Stockholders sued the board for negligence, and Hale's reputation was torn apart in the press. Overnight, the same man who had called Marcus reckless became the face of corporate stupidity. The domino effect was complete. The company filed for full bankruptcy protection within a month. Assets were seized, property sold, and projects abandoned. Thousands lost their jobs, and entire communities felt the aftershocks. The story became a lesson taught in business schools around the world, not about leadership failure, but about pride, power, and the cost of silence. And somewhere in all that noise and done in the endless reports, lawsuits, and financial ruins, was Marcus Ellison, watching the empire he had built with love crumble into dust. He wasn't angry anymore, just tired. He had tried to change the system to prove that leadership could come from passion and integrity, not greed and politics, but the system had chewed him up and spat him out. As the final press release declared the company's closure, Marcus turned off his television and walked away. The world would move on, as it always does, but the scars of what happened, the betrayal, the silence, the fall, would never fade. Because when power replaces purpose and greed replaces trust, no empire, no matter how mighty, can stand. The end came faster than anyone expected. One evening, the company still stood, barely breathing, but standing. By morning, it was gone. The bankruptcy hit like a lightning strike in the middle of a clear sky, sudden, brutal, and irreversible. Marcus Ellison woke up to 100 missed calls. His phone wouldn't stop buzzing. The first message he opened was from his former finance director. It read, "They filed for Chapter 11. It's over." Marcus froze. His heart pounded as he stared at the words, reading them again and again, as if doing so could change them. But the truth was there, unshakable. The company was dead. News broke before sunrise. Every major network covered it in flashing red banners. Tech giant files for bankruptcy overnight. Former CEO's deal triggers financial collapse. A billion-dollar dream ends in ruin. Outside the company's headquarters, camera crews gathered like vultures. Employees stood in clusters, some crying, some staring blankly at the locked glass doors. Security guards turned them away, handing out printed notices. All operations suspended until further notice. The same people who had given their hearts and years to the company were now just names on a list of layoffs. Marcus sat in silence, watching it all unfold on television. Every image was a punch to the gut. The logo being taken down, the reporters shouting, the employees leaving with boxes of personal items. This was the empire he had built brick by brick, now crumbling in front of millions. His mind drifted back to the early days. The small apartment, the cheap coffee, the team that believed in him when no one else did. He could almost smell the burnt midnight coffee and hear the laughter of those first dreamers. And now, all of it was gone. Across town, the board members gathered one last time. The atmosphere was heavy. The once proud conference room now filled with defeat. Richard Hale sat at the head of the table, pale and silent. The bankruptcy lawyers explained the paperwork in flat voices. "Once we sign, all assets will be liquidated," one said. Hale nodded numbly. The arrogance that once fueled him was gone. All that remained was regret. He had destroyed the very thing he claimed to protect. Some board members refused to sign. Others did so with trembling hands. When the final signature was placed, a strange silence filled the room. It wasn't just the sound of a company dying. It was the sound of dreams collapsing, of reputations fading, of power losing its meaning. Outside, the media captured the moment. The once great board walking out of the building like ghosts, escorted by lawyers and silence. That night, Marcus took a drive through the city. He ended up near the building where it all began, the same street where his tiny first office had once stood. He parked the car and sat there staring at the empty lot. The city around him was alive with noise, but inside his car, there was nothing but stillness. He whispered softly, "I built something beautiful, and they destroyed it." For the first time in years, Marcus let himself cry, not for the money, not for the fame, none for the people. The hundreds of employees who had trusted him, the families who had depended on the company's success, the young interns who had looked up to him as proof that anything was possible. He felt as though he had failed them all, even though deep down he knew the truth. He wasn't the one who caused this. The next morning, newspapers ran his photo again, the same photo they had once used when calling him the visionary CEO. Only now, the captions read, "The man who lost everything." The media loved stories of success, but they loved stories of failure even more. They replayed his old interviews, twisting his words to sound arrogant, careless, and proud. It was as if the world had decided he was the villain, even though the villains were still sitting comfortably behind their gated homes. In the following days, the company's offices were cleared out. Computers, furniture, even framed awards were auctioned off to pay debts. Marcus's old corner office, once filled with life and energy, stood empty, only dust and echoes remaining. A janitor who had worked there since the beginning found a small plaque on the floor that read, "Innovation is born from belief." It was one of Marcus's quotes. He picked it up, wiped the dust off, and whispered, "He believed." That's what made it all real. Meanwhile, the world moved on. Competitors absorbed the company's clients. Investors shifted their focus elsewhere, and new CEOs rose to fame, promising to learn from past mistakes. But behind the noise, Marcus's story lingered, a warning, a legend, a whisper in every boardroom meeting about what happens when ego outweighs vision. In one final interview weeks later, a reporter asked him, "Do you think you made mistakes?" Marcus thought for a long moment before answering. "Of course," he said. "Every leader makes mistakes. But I didn't destroy that company. I tried to save it. They destroyed it when they put politics before purpose." That quote went viral. For the first time since the collapse, people began to see the story differently. Documentaries, articles, and podcasts began re-examining what had really happened. Slowly, the truth started to surface, and Marcus's name began to shift from villain to victim. But by then, Marcus had already disappeared from the spotlight. He wasn't looking for redemption. He was looking for peace. The world would debate what really happened for years, but only he knew what it felt like to watch everything he loved vanish in one night. Not because of failure, but because of betrayal. The bankruptcy papers might have closed the company, but they couldn't erase Marcus's vision. Somewhere deep in the ruins of that empire, his dream still lived, not in profits or buildings, but in the people who had believed in him. And though the company died overnight, the legend of Marcus Ellison had just begun. Weeks passed after the bankruptcy, but the story refused to die. What had once been a headline now became an obsession. News anchors debated, investors speculated, and journalists kept digging, desperate to uncover what really happened behind those boardroom doors. The world had moved from blaming Marcus Ellison to wondering if maybe, just maybe, they had been wrong about him. It started with a leak. One rainy Thursday morning, an anonymous source sent hundreds of internal emails and legal documents to 3 major news outlets. Within hours, the story spread like wildfire. The documents revealed everything: the secret meetings, the private memos, the warnings ignored. Most shocking of all was an internal legal report showing that the board had been fully aware of the ardent clause, before they fired Marcus. They had known the risk, known the consequences, and had done it anyway. The news hit the world like a thunderclap. Leaked documents reveal board ignored warnings before firing CEO. Marcus Ellison vindicated? Corporate cover-up exposed, social media exploded. Hashtags like them they knew, justice for Marcus, and a truth uncovered trended globally. People who had once mocked Marcus now called him a victim. Former employees came forward, confirming what they had suspected all along. That the board's decision wasn't about leadership or business. It was about power, control, and ego. For the first time since his downfall, Marcus's phone began to ring for a different reason. Journalists weren't hunting for a scandal. They wanted his side of the story. News networks invited him to speak. Publishers offered him book deals. But Marcus stayed quiet. He didn't want revenge or fame. He just wanted the truth to speak for itself. Still, the truth had a way of finding him. One evening, a young reporter named Leah Carter, the same journalist who had once interviewed him during his company's early success, showed up at his doorstep. She held a folder full of documents and said, "You need to see this." Marcus invited her in, and as she spread the papers across his coffee table, his face grew pale. He read the memos in silence, internal emails between board members plotting his removal, financial notes showing how they ignored Arden's warnings, and one particularly chilling line from Richard Hale that said, "He's becoming too powerful. If we don't act soon, we'll lose control completely." Marcus leaned back, staring at the papers. His voice was calm, almost tired. "So they knew everything," he said softly. Leah nodded. "They did, and they blamed you for their own mistake." The next day, Leah's article went live. It wasn't just another piece, and it was an exposé. Titled "The Truth Behind the Fall: How Power and Prejudice Destroyed a Billion-Dollar Vision," it painted a full picture of what had really happened. It showed how Marcus's deal with Ardent Global was meant to save the company, how he had warned the board of future risks, and how they had deliberately silenced him out of fear and pride. The story spread across the world. Overnight, Marcus's image shifted from villain to hero. Business leaders began citing him as an example of integrity under fire. Commentators called it the greatest act of corporate betrayal in modern history. Even government officials launched investigations into the board's conduct. Within a week, subpoenas were issued, and Richard Hale found himself sitting before lawyers, forced to answer questions he had long avoided. In one televised hearing, Hale's confident tone cracked. Under pressure, he admitted that the board had been aware of the clause and had fired Marcus despite legal warnings. The room fell silent. It was over. The truth, long buried under lies and manipulation, had finally broken through. When Marcus watched the hearing from his living room, he didn't smile or celebrate. He simply exhaled as if releasing years of pain in one breath. His assistant turned to him and said, "You were right all along." Marcus nodded. "Truth always takes time," he said, "but it never stays hidden forever." Soon after, journalists began visiting Marcus again, but this time their questions were different. They didn't ask about failure or bankruptcy. They asked about redemption, about lessons, about resilience. People around the world sent letters thanking him for his honesty and strength. Students wrote essays about him, calling him an example of integrity in a corrupt system. But Marcus didn't return to the spotlight. He didn't rebuild the company or run for public attention. Instead, he started something small, a foundation that provided mentorship and funding to young Black entrepreneurs who dreamed of building their own companies. He called it Project Rise. When asked why, he said simply, "Because rising again is more powerful than never falling." Years later, his name became more than a headline. It became a symbol. Universities taught his story as a case study in ethics and leadership. Documentaries called him the CEO who was sacrificed for the truth, and every time people spoke about him, they didn't talk about his fall anymore. They talked about his courage. Marcus often said that the hardest part wasn't losing the company. It was losing faith in people he trusted. But when the truth came out, that faith began to heal, slowly, quietly, like light returning after a long night. And though the company he built never returned, something far more powerful rose from its ashes, a legacy built not on profits but on truth.